I'm going to go over the May Q&A questions that I got on our Facebook group. So this is my Facebook group. You'll see it tagged in the description, where I try to help FNP students in any way I can. So some of the questions I'd already answered typing in, but there was a few that I wanted to address here today. And so one person asked, there is so much to learn in so little time. How do you manage the anxiety that one might not be able to give enough care to a patient? And this is actually something that I heavily address in the SOAP Note course that I do, because charting is really tied into timeliness, which is tied into patient appointments. And so the whole thing is one consistent ball. And when one looks at charting and one looks at timeliness, there are ways to utilize your time in the best possible way as far as efficiency that will over time give you more and more time with the patient that you find more meaningful. The other thing is that you have to see primary care as a journey with a patient. And again, I really, really encourage continuity of care, staying in positions long term, avoiding job hopping, all for the betterment of patients so that we can create these long-term relationships with these patients. And two, I want you to think of someone's healthcare as not one appointment. So someone's healthcare is a journey and you're there with them. And so it's going to be a long-term thing in order to get their health in order. So if they come to you on day one just wrecked, like health is shot, everything that could possibly be wrong is going wrong, you need to pick the thing that's going to be the most problematic for their long-term health outcomes and address that thing. And maybe one secondary thing if there's something else that's very serious going on. But we're going to start with our first appointments with just lots of conversation and diagnostics. When you're establishing care with a patient, you should be given a longer amount of time to see that patient with a new patient appointment, especially if if you're establishing that they've got chronic diseases and you're going to be managing them for years instead of just like a cold visit or something like that. So the first appointment should be longer, and then from there, you should think of each appointment as a step. And this helps me psychologically. I feel like when you're thinking about that anxiety that you may not be able to give enough care to a patient within one appointment, it's that anything that we do, one piece of advice, one piece of education, one medication, one lab work or diagnostic, something that's appropriate and effective and meaningful and cost efficient, is another step towards them getting their health under control. And that to me is very meaningful. So that is how to battle the anxiety, is knowing that you're going to get better at managing your time, especially within that first year, to where you're going to be able to spend more time with your patients. And then two, that it is a journey and that you are going to have to see these patients more than once and they are going to have to be invested in their care to be able to work with you to get to that point. All right, our next question is it more beneficial to work as a 1099 or a W-2 and why? And so I think this is incredibly different for everyone who comes in. Everything kind of comes out in the wash. It just depends on what you need. So if you want to be 1099, you're not going to get tons of benefits. You may get a sign-on bonus. You may get some paid time off. You may get things like that. But 1099 is very much like, here's your money. They're not going to take the taxes out for you. And as someone who is self-employed and owns their own business, keeping up with your own taxes it's a pain, but it's not so bad when you are only having like one stream of income. When you start getting multiple 1099s, so if you're self-employed or working for a contractor or working a locum tenens position and you've got multiple streams of income coming in, it is helpful to either invest in some nice software, get some good spreadsheets set up, or even consider a small business accountant to help you keep all of that stuff straight. You can sometimes end up making more money in those positions if you already have, say, health benefits from another source, so that you don't need some of those benefits. Then also, too, with the 1099, you're taking that money, you're investing it in a way that's more meaningful for you rather than a traditional benefit, retirement benefit, things like that from a W-2. You can kind of pick where you want that to go. And so you can kind of grow your wealth in a different way with a 1099, where a W-2, it's a little more standard. You get health care, you're going to get less money per hour. So it really depends on what you're looking for from your job. And I know there are people out there who are going to have a lot more opinions than I and know a lot more about this than me. But I have had different types of positions. I've had contracts. When I was in education, I would just do these like short-term gigs, and I'm like, no benefits, don't want any of this. Just give me X number of office hours, X number of home hours, and X number of classroom hours. Pay me this. And that was 1099. And then I've had W-2 positions, of course, where I got the whole normal package. The next question on there, is it common for students to have to pay for clinical sites? And I actually did talk about this in episode 5, things I wish I knew before starting grad school. And yes, I did a survey within this Facebook group, probably end of last year, because I wanted to get a better picture of how much people were spending. And I was pleasantly just surprised to find many students having had paid none for their clinicals, and most patients, most students only paying between $1,000 and $3,000 for clinicals. There was a few people that put themselves in over $4,000 for paying for clinicals. Fortunately, I'm going to guess a lot of those people were in Florida, because that place is very, very difficult to get a preceptor, because it is absolutely flooded with NPs and with students. There's something about Florida. I guess everyone likes to be there. I'm touching Florida. I'm in South Carolina. So is it common for students to have to pay? Yes. Is it a huge financial burden? Not typically. So mentally go ahead and set aside $1,000 to $3,000 to potentially pay for one clinical rotation. I do know too, you may need to start increasing that amount, because I have seen a small hike in the rates, the hourly rates for paying for clinical sites. So maybe bump that up to 4 in your mind so that you're not shocked. So set aside that money. If you don't use it, that's fantastic. You can use that money maybe towards, boards, or joining a professional organization, or doing a skills class, something like that. But go ahead and mentally have that prepared that you may pay. And again, most people put themselves, like if you look at a bell curve, a lot of people really had put none. And then another good chunk was between like 1 and 3, and then a few over 4. So that helps you out. Our last question that we'll go over tonight is, so if you're in an FNP program but want to specialize or work in a specialty when you graduate, how do you get that experience that they want for these jobs if our clinicals are specific to family care, GYN, and pediatrics? For example, if I wanted to go into dermatology or orthopedics. So how do you make that transition? So you will find, and this, it may be kind of a too late thing, but a lot of people will try to get nursing experience within those fields. So you want to work in outpatient, you could work in outpatient orthopedics, you could work in dermatology as a nurse. So if you haven't started school yet and you're really kind of looking into it, if there's a specialty that you want to be in when you leave, it is very helpful to have had nursing experience within that specialty. Especially if you want to work in an outpatient clinic. You're likely going to be offered a job when you transition. I was working in outpatient cardiology and was offered a position to work with them. The type of work was not what I wanted. I would have wanted to stay in the clinic. They would have wanted me to round, help with interventions and things like that. And since I'd gone for FNP, I really didn't feel comfortable doing that. I really wanted to be in the ambulatory care setting. So I didn't take the job, but that is an option. That's something out there is thinking about transitioning from working in an ambulatory clinic in a specialty setting to being the nurse practitioner there. So there's that. What do you do if your clinical rotations are, family care, GYN, pediatrics? You're going to want to let your preceptors know, I'm very, very interested in X. Say you want to do neurology. Well, helpfully then, all the physicians and practitioners within the clinic will get to know you, and maybe if they have an interesting case, you'll be able to get pulled in, go and see with that. I mean, I have found in my experience when I was in school, they would know what my things were and what my niche was, and I would kind of float around the clinic sometimes with multiple providers that were working that day. All the providers would typically know that there was a student in the house, and they would come grab you if something very interesting was going on. A lot of times it did stick with my primary preceptor, but they would kind of pull me around if there was something that they were like, you need to see this, you're not going to see this again. So let your site know what you're interested in and try to get experience there. And then when you put together your resume, you want to highlight that you had maybe specific interests, made an emphasis on trying to go in and see patients that were in that specialty. My program allotted 40 hours for specialty care, And so you can pick, every program's different. I've seen up to, a couple hundred hours could be in specialty. So I did cardiology and dermatology was the two that I did. And it wasn't very much, but at least it gave me an idea of what they did in their day-to-day routine. When I went with dermatology, I was like, okay, literally all day they're just checking skin and cutting things off. Not for me. Very interesting. Wasn't for me. And then in cardiology, totally my vibe. Love cardiology. Everything I've done has been cardiac centered until I became a nurse practitioner. But I really decided to focus on primary care. So that's what you can do is you can try to get your specialty hours. There are things that can also be done post-grad. So there's usually, not always, 3 to 6 months of orientation when you're going into a specialty. Again, that's not always. I think it should be. There's fellowships, residency programs that will help you cycle through specialties. And there's postmaster certificates. Duke University is very popular for getting postmaster certificates. I'm in the Southeast, so I know about a lot of Duke's programs. I know Vanderbilt's got some as well. So look around in your areas where they have the postmaster certificates in certain specialties. Some certificates can be gained by working in a specialty setting for X number of hours, completing X number of CMEs, and then sitting for an exam within that specialty. I know specifically like ENP has that, so emergency nurse practitioner. You can either get a postmaster certificate or work, I think it's 1,000 or 2,000 hours, complete the proper amount of CMEs, and take an examination. And then you would have an ENP equivalent certificate. So those are some things about going into specialties. The other thing is if you're really, really interested in some of the more complex specialties, neurology, things like that, I have seen a number of adult gerontology acute care nurse practitioners go into acute care nurse practitioners go into doing these specialty clinics and these specialty rotations. And they get the opportunity to do that. And so I think that's another way to do it is if you are in a position where you're early in your program or you want to switch, going into an acute care nurse practitioner program would then be a possible alternative because they don't just do inpatient rotations. I have seen them do a combination of both, so doing outpatient specialty and inpatient hospitalist intensive care specialty. And so if that's something you're very interested in, specializing, and you want to do something that possibly has you rounding, AG, AC, and P may be the more appropriate track for you. So I hope those answers help with the questions that you guys asked this month so far. I would be happy to answer more questions in a video maybe next week. So if you have some specific questions you want answered, go ahead and put those in the comments. All right, and make sure you like, share this video with your classmates and subscribe so you get notifications when I go live. Good night.